The call came in late on May 3, 2009. Dispatch reported a potential suicide at a modest one-story house in a quiet Christchurch suburb. I arrived with my partner on what should have been an uneventful evening. Helen Milner, the wife of the deceased, opened the door. Her face was red, tears streaking her cheeks, but there was something disconcerting about her demeanor, something just off. She led us to the master bedroom. The man on the bed was Philip Nisbet, 47 years old, a truck driver, a father. His body lay diagonally across the bed. His eyes were open, unseeing. Beside him, on the nightstand, were 2 empty packets of pills and a half-empty glass of water. Helen, clutching her phone, claimed she had evidence of his intent to take his own life. She handed me the phone. On the screen was a text message supposedly sent by Philip at 10:30 p.m. It read like a goodbye note, expressing despair and love for Helen and their son. At first glance, it seemed plausible, but something about the situation gnawed at me. Her tears felt too calculated, her grief strangely performative. We processed the scene. I noted the pristine order of the room, the peculiar lack of disturbance. If Philip had taken his own life, it had been done with meticulous care or someone else's. My partner stepped outside to call for the coroner. I stayed, observing Helen. Her sobs were loud, almost theatrical, but her eyes darted to me whenever she thought I wasn't looking. As the body was prepared for transport, I spoke with Helen. She insisted Philip had been struggling emotionally and mentioned a farewell letter stored in their safe. Her words were rehearsed, but I played along, nodding, asking the standard questions. She seemed too eager to provide answers, as though she anticipated every query. Later, I stepped outside for air and lit a cigarette. My partner joined me, shaking his head. "Doesn't feel right, does it?" he muttered. I didn't answer. We both knew something was wrong, but there was no solid evidence, only a gut feeling. The coroner's preliminary report came back within days. Philip had high levels of an anti-allergic drug in his system. It was an unusual choice for self-harm. The dosage suggested more than a mistake, it suggested intent. But whose intent? That question lingered. As we notified Philip's family, his sister Leeanne became a persistent presence. She refused to believe her brother had taken his own life. Her conviction matched my unease. She shared stories of Helen, accounts of her manipulative behavior, her fixation on money. Leon's words were damning, but they were just that, words. I needed more. Helen's behavior in the weeks following Philip's death added fuel to the fire. She moved her ex-boyfriend, Barry, into the house she had shared with Philip barely 3 weeks after his death. She spoke casually about the insurance money, enough to cover her future comfortably, she said. She even hinted at plans to sell the house. One night, Leeanne called me, her voice tight with anger. Helen had shown her a typed farewell letter, supposedly written by Philip. Leeanne described it in detail, the cold, emotionless wording, the absurd claims about infidelity and illegitimacy. She insisted the signature wasn't Philip's. I could hear the frustration in her voice. "They're lies," she said. "She's making it all up to cover her tracks." I began digging deeper. Helen's financial records showed purchases of the anti-allergic drug made under false names. Witnesses came forward, describing Helen's odd remarks at work. She had openly fantasized about becoming a widow, they said, joking about poisons and ways to make someone disappear. I documented everything, piecing together a timeline that pointed to premeditation. The turning point came when Helen's son, Adam, stepped forward. He described seeing his mother with empty capsules on the night Philip fell ill weeks before his death. He had warned Philip, but the man had brushed it off, unable to believe the worst of his wife. Adam's account was chilling, a puzzle piece falling into place. The more I learned, the more I realized the depth of Helen's coldness. She had staged every detail, from the fake text messages to the farewell letter, all to create the illusion of suicide. Her motive was clear, the $250,000 insurance payout. When we finally arrested her, Helen's reaction was as unnerving as her initial performance. She didn't cry or protest. Instead, she smiled, a small, fleeting expression that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't fear or shock. It was satisfaction, as if she believed she would still win. But justice was patient. The case would take years to resolve, yet each step brought us closer to unraveling the web of lies she had spun. And as I watched her escorted away in handcuffs, I knew this was just the beginning of her reckoning. The investigation into Philip Nisbet's death had grown colder by the day. But the shadow of doubt hanging over Helen Milner was impossible to ignore. What I learned about her past began to paint a picture of someone far removed from the grieving widow she presented to the world. Helen wasn't just a wife or a mother, she was a manipulator, a thief, and now, I feared, a killer. Her childhood was a harbinger of things to come. Records and anecdotes told of a girl with a penchant for dishonesty and theft, expelled from school for stealing from classmates and her own family. Later, she falsified documents and lied her way into jobs, only to be dismissed for theft. But these petty schemes were only the beginning. Her manipulative streak grew sharper, her motives darker. Helen's first marriage to Mark Cars was rife with conflict. According to Mark, she twisted truths and used their children as pawns in a bitter custody battle. She told the boys their father had moved far away and didn't want to see them, fracturing the family irrevocably. By the time Philip entered her life, she had left a trail of emotional and financial devastation. Philip, by all accounts, was a kind and trusting man. That trust would be his undoing. Helen's co-workers described her as someone who thrived on conflict and control. She spoke openly, and disturbingly often, about poisons, particularly her interest in their effects. It was these casual remarks, dismissed as tasteless humor at the time, that would later become chilling in hindsight. Helen's obsession with money was well documented. She had stolen from employers, lied to family members, and manipulated anyone in her path to financial gain. When Philip purchased a life insurance policy worth $250,000, it became the perfect catalyst for her darkest scheme. The timing of her actions was meticulous. She waited until the policy's exclusion clause for suicide expired before making her move. Helen's plan was calculated and cruel. Evidence revealed that she had purchased doses of the anti-allergy medication Ferrin, to which Philip was deathly allergic. Witnesses confirmed that she used false names and addresses for the transactions. Her preparation was deliberate, her execution precise. She began testing small doses of the drug on Philip weeks before his death, under the guise of helping him recover from mysterious symptoms. The staged suicide was her masterpiece of deceit. What stood out most was Helen's behavior in the days after Philip's death. While his family grieved, she seemed strangely composed, even cheerful at times. She made casual remarks about selling the house and openly flaunted her relationship with Barry, the man she had moved in shortly after Philip's death. To her, it was business as usual. It was during a conversation with Leeanne, Philip's sister, that Helen's facade began to crack. Leeanne recounted to me how Helen had shown her a typed farewell letter, claiming it was written by Philip. The letter was absurd, a bizarre mix of accusations and confessions, including the false claim that Philip's youngest son wasn't his biological child. It was a calculated move to sow discord between Philip's sons and solidify her narrative. Leeanne, who knew her brother's handwriting well, was adamant that the signature on the letter was forged. By then, Helen's arrogance had become her weakness. She underestimated the determination of those who loved Philip. Leanne's quiet persistence and our mounting evidence left her cornered. Yet Helen remained defiant. She told anyone who would listen that she was the victim, that Philip's family was out to ruin her. She was relentless in painting herself as a wronged woman. The lies didn't end there. When her son Adam expressed doubts about her story, Helen turned her manipulative wrath on him. She sent her self-threatening text messages, framing Adam as the sender. Her fabricated story led to his arrest and a 2-week detention. It was a cruel and calculated act, designed to silence him and solidify her control over the narrative. Every move Helen made was an insight into her character, a person who saw relationships not as bonds of trust, but as opportunities for manipulation. She wielded lies like weapons, crafting an image of herself as a victim while orchestrating one of the most cold-blooded murders I had ever encountered. And as the evidence against her grew, so did the chilling realization Helen Milner was incapable of remorse. When a man like Philip Nisbet dies, it's not just the loss of his life that echoes, it's the destruction of those who loved him. In the weeks and months following his death, the cracks in the lives of his family and friends widened into chasms, exposing the depth of their pain and the unrelenting cruelty of the woman at its center. Helen Milner's actions didn't just take Philip's life, they shattered the foundations of those who depended on him, trusted him, and loved him. Philip's sister Leeanne was the first to feel the full weight of the tragedy. The call she received that morning from her father, announcing that her brother had taken his own life, was incomprehensible. Philip had always been the dependable one, the protector of their family. The idea that he would end his life didn't just seem unlikely, it seemed impossible. But the official story, backed by Helen's tearful insistence, left little room for doubt. In those early days, Leeanne carried the unbearable grief of believing her brother had given up, but something deep inside her rebelled against the narrative. The more Leeanne thought about it, the less sense it made. Philip wasn't the kind of man to leave unanswered questions. He loved his children fiercely, especially his youngest son, Ben, with whom he shared a close bond. For him to walk away from that relationship, from his responsibilities, was unimaginable. And yet, as Helen began to subtly change the story, introducing new details to paint Philip in a darker light, Leon's grief morphed into suspicion. Ben, still a teenager, bore the brunt of the fallout. Helen's treatment of him was cold and calculating. She cast doubts on his parentage, a vicious lie meant to undermine his sense of identity and connection to his father. The typed farewell letter claimed that Philip had learned Ben wasn't his biological son, a blatant falsehood disproved later by DNA tests. But in the immediate aftermath, the damage was done. Ben was left to grapple with not just the loss of his father, but also the poison Helen had sown between him and his half-brother Zach. For Zach, the eldest son from Philip's first marriage, the circumstances of his father's death were equally devastating. Helen's narrative of a broken man spiraling into despair didn't match the father he knew. While she offered him access to Philip's belongings, her motives felt calculated. It was as if she were trying to drive a wedge between Zach and Ben, playing them against each other to solidify her control over the estate and the life insurance payout. The growing tension between the brothers became another painful chapter in a story that already felt unbearable. Adam, Helen's son from her first marriage, found himself dragged into the turmoil in ways he never anticipated. He had long been wary of his mother, her lies, and her manipulations. After Philip's death, Adam voiced his concerns to his grandmother, telling her about the capsules he had seen Helen handling and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Philip's illness weeks before his death. Helen's response was as swift as it was brutal. She fabricated threatening text messages and framed Adam as the sender, leading to his arrest. For 2 weeks, he sat in a jail cell, bewildered and betrayed by the person who should have been his greatest protector. Adam's imprisonment was a stark example of Helen's capacity for cruelty. She was willing to destroy her own child to protect herself, to silence dissent, and to maintain her carefully constructed lies. When the truth about her fabricated threats came to light, Adam was released, but the scars of that betrayal remained. His relationship with his mother, already fractured, was now irreparably broken. The ripple effects extended beyond the family. Philip's friends and co-workers, many of whom had admired his kindness and reliability, were left struggling to reconcile his death with the man they knew. Helen's casual remarks about her newfound freedom and her plans for the future added an unsettling layer to their grief. How could someone move on so quickly from the loss of their spouse? How could she speak so flippantly about a man who had been her partner for years? Leeanne, meanwhile, was quietly building her case. Every interaction with Helen, every offhand comment, every inconsistency in her story became a piece of the puzzle. It was a heavy burden to bear, but she knew she couldn't give up. The more she uncovered, the more determined she became to bring the truth to light. It wasn't just about justice for Philip, it was about honoring the man he was and protecting his legacy from the lies Helen tried to weave. The toll on Leeanne was immense. A single mother living in Australia, she juggled the demands of her own life with the relentless pursuit of justice. She spent countless hours poring over documents, comparing signatures, and convincing others to reopen the case. Her persistence paid off when the police finally launched a homicide investigation. But the road ahead was long and fraught with obstacles. For the Nisbet family, Helen's betrayal was a wound that wouldn't heal. The loss of Philip was devastating enough, but the realization that his death had been orchestrated by the woman he trusted most added a layer of anguish that was difficult to articulate. It wasn't just the act of murder, it was the coldness, the calculation, and the utter disregard for the lives she destroyed in the process. And yet, in the face of unimaginable loss, they found resilience. Ben grew stronger, determined to honor his father's memory. Zach began to rebuild his relationship with his half-brother. And Leeanne, the unwavering sister, became a beacon of hope for her family, proving that even in the darkest moments, the truth has a way of coming to light. Philip Nisbet's death, at first glance, was just another tragic statistic, a supposed suicide in a quiet Christchurch suburb. But as the truth about Helen Milner's sinister plot began to unravel, it became clear this wasn't an isolated crime. It was a case that would resonate far beyond the walls of their modest home. The calculated murder, the manipulation, and the web of lies exposed cracks not only in a family, but also in the fabric of societal trust. The shockwaves of this case rippled far and wide, touching everyone who heard it. The community, once a safe haven for families and neighbors, was shaken to its core. Christchurch had always been known as a city of tranquility, a place where violent crime was rare, and the bonds of trust between neighbors ran deep. Philip's death and the revelations that followed shattered that illusion. People began to question the faces they saw every day. Could they truly know the people they lived beside? For the public, Helen Milner became the embodiment of cold-blooded deceit. The details of her actions were so audacious, so calculated, that they sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened observers. The fact that she plotted her husband's murder for financial gain, going as far as to poison him and stage a suicide, made her a figure of revulsion. Her lack of remorse and her readiness to destroy the lives of those around her further amplified the public's sense of outrage. The media played a crucial role in amplifying the societal impact of the case. Headlines screamed Helen's nickname, the Black Widow, and the details of her manipulations became the subject of endless speculation. Each new revelation seemed darker than the last: the fake text messages, the staged farewell letter, her cruel treatment of Philip's children, and her willingness to frame her own son. For weeks the case dominated the airwaves and the front pages, sparking heated debates about morality, greed, and the fragility of trust within families. But this wasn't just tabloid fodder, it was a mirror held up to society, forcing uncomfortable conversations. The public asked themselves questions they weren't ready to answer. How could someone go so far? How could a person hide such malice beneath a veneer of normalcy? And more hauntingly, how often might such darkness go unnoticed in their own lives? Among the most unsettling elements of the case was the failure of institutions to act swiftly. The police, despite early signs of foul play, initially treated Philip's death as a straightforward suicide. This hesitation cost precious time, allowing Helen to weave her web of lies further. The media didn't shy away from exposing this misstep, and the public response was fierce. Letters to editors and opinion pieces demanded accountability, questioning whether gender stereotypes had influenced the initial dismissal of suspicion. Would a grieving husband have received the same leniency as a grieving widow? The public wanted answers. For the legal system, the case became a stark reminder of the importance of diligence and thorough investigation. The revelations about Helen's past, her history of manipulation, theft, and deceit painted a clear picture of a pattern that had gone unchecked for years. This led to calls for reforms, particularly in how suspicious deaths are assessed and how quickly investigators pursue evidence when inconsistencies arise. Philip's case became a rallying cry for change, a demand that no stone be left unturned in any investigation. The societal impact didn't stop at institutions. The case stirred a profound sense of distrust in personal relationships. The intimate betrayal at the heart of Helen's crime, the murder of her husband, the man who trusted her most, tapped into a primal fear. People began to question the dynamics of their own relationships. Could their partner, their friend, or their family member harbor such darkness? For many, it was an unsettling thought they couldn't shake. Helen's calculated use of her new relationship with Barry further inflamed public discourse about the nature of loyalty and self-interest. The speed with which she moved on, inviting Barry into the home she had shared with Philip, felt not only callous but symbolic of a deeper disregard for human connection. It was a display of greed and selfishness that struck a nerve with a society that values compassion and loyalty. Amid the chaos, there were glimmers of resilience. Philip's family, particularly his sister Leeanne, became symbols of perseverance in the fight for justice. Her unwavering belief in her brother's innocence and her relentless pursuit of the truth resonated deeply with those who followed the case. She became a beacon of hope, proof that even in the face of overwhelming deceit and betrayal, integrity could prevail. Leon's fight also inspired broader discussions about the role of families in seeking justice. The case highlighted the importance of persistence and the willingness to challenge the narratives presented by those in positions of authority. It was a reminder that even when institutions falter, individuals have the power to seek the truth. For Christchurch, the case left a lasting scar. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a villain's face. It can smile, cry, and stand beside you in your darkest moments, pretending to share your grief. but it also became a story of resilience, a testament to the power of truth and the courage it takes to fight for it. The ripple effects of Helen Milner's crime were vast and enduring. They reshaped how a community viewed trust, how a society demanded justice, and how individuals valued the relationships they held dear. And though the darkness of her actions would never fully fade, the light of those who fought for Philip's memory shone just as brightly, illuminating a path forward for a shaken society. Philip Nisbet's death exposed profound failures in the systems meant to protect justice. Initially dismissed as a suicide, the case was marred by assumptions and oversights that delayed the truth. From the start, Helen Milner's stage scene, the empty pill packets, a fabricated farewell text, was accepted at face value, allowing her to continue her charade. It took the unwavering determination of Philip's family, particularly his sister Leeanne, to force authorities to reopen the case and dig deeper. This was a sobering lesson for investigators. Had the early inconsistencies been scrutinized, Helen's cold, calculated plan might have unraveled sooner. Instead, the police's initial misjudgment allowed her to manipulate the narrative, all while securing her financial gain and inflicting further harm on Philip's family. Leeanne became the voice of justice. Her persistence was instrumental in uncovering Helen's deceit, from forged signatures on the so-called farewell note to the suspicious purchase of medication under false names. She rallied against institutional complacency, refusing to let her brother's memory be tainted by a false narrative. Her resolve ultimately pushed the investigation forward, leading to the discovery of damning evidence that proved Philip's death was no suicide but a premeditated murder. When the case reached trial, the evidence against Helen was overwhelming. Witnesses recounted her disturbing behavior, her obsession with poisons, and her outright fantasies of being free of her husband. Helen's own son, Adam, provided chilling testimony about her manipulations and efforts to cover her tracks. The jury's decision was swift, guilty of murder. In February 2014, Helen was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 17 years. For the family, this marked the end of a long, painful journey. But the damage left by Helen's actions lingered. Philip's children struggled with the lies and betrayal, while Leeanne bore the emotional toll of fighting for justice. The case highlighted the need for systemic reforms in how authorities handle suspicious deaths. It underscored the importance of questioning assumptions and pursuing truth relentlessly, even when it's inconvenient. Helen Milner's crime was a stark reminder of how evil can hide behind a mask of normalcy. But it was also a testament to the power of persistence. Thanks to the tireless efforts of Philip's family, justice was achieved. While the scars of this tragedy remain, so too does the example of courage and determination in the face of immense loss.